class. As you know, we've been discussing the fundamentals of music. Yesterday we talked about note names in both the bass clef and the treble clef. Now today, what we're going to talk about is the relationship in what we call a major scale. Now, if there's any questions during this whole lecture, please feel free to raise your hand, okay? Now, behind me, you'll see a series of staves. This first one is the one that we're going to pay particular attention to. Now, above and below each of these notes, you see what looks to be a little bit of gibberish, but right now we're going to focus on the bottom line. Now, you're probably thinking, what do W's and H's have anything to do with music? Well, these stand for whole tones and half tones, and that stands for the distance between two pitches. So we see whole tone, half tone, whole tone, whole tone, whole tone, half tone. Okay? This is the formula we use to build a major scale. And it's the same for every scale that you're building. I should say every major scale that you're building. Now, above these pitches, we have what we call solfege. Some of you may be familiar with this, some of you may not be. If any of you have seen the movie The Sound of Music, I'm sure you've heard Maria sing, "Do, a deer, a female deer," right? Well, what she's actually using is solfege, and they're singing a major scale throughout the whole song. So the first pitch that we start on is Do. So we are starting on the pitch of C. That means that this is the C major scale, okay? So let's do it together. Do, re, mi, fa, so, la, ti, do. And you'll notice that we start on Do and we end on Do, meaning that the C and this C are an octave apart. All right? Let's sing the C major scale on solfege. Gentlemen, we'll start here. Ladies, here. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Now back down. Do, ti, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do. Excellent. All right. So as I said before, we use this whole tone and half tone formula to create every scale that we use, every major scale that we use, excuse me. And we can use this do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do pattern, or solfege, to figure out what scale we're singing. So let's take a look at this next one. Can anybody tell me what pitch we're starting on? Yes?
G.
G. So, this is our G major scale, and some of you might be thinking, well, what's that? That kind of looks like one of those hashtags we use when we're tweeting, right? Well, in music, this is known as a sharp, and some of you may remember that from yesterday's lecture. We use sharps and flats for different keys. Well, in the G major scale, to keep our whole tone and half tone formula, we have to raise the seventh pitch, F, to F sharp to keep the half tone distance between it and G. So it'll still be do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Okay, so let's try this one. G major will sound like this. F sharp, G. Okay, we hear that F sharp in there, and this is what it would sound like if it had no sharp on that F. And that's not a major scale, is it? Because it's not a half step. That's a half step. All right. So we have our C major scale and we have our G major scale. What I'd like to do is go through all of the scales that have sharps in them, and then we'll go through all of the scales that have flats, and be marking down which scales have how many sharps and how many flats, okay? And remember that C major doesn't have either, okay? There are no sharps or flats in C major. And how many sharps or flats are in G major? Yes?
1.
Exactly. Okay, so now we'll move on to D major. And as you see, we have 2 sharps in this scale, okay? F sharp and C sharp, because we're maintaining that whole tone and half tone pattern, right? Okay. And remember that if we didn't have these raised pitches, it would not be a major scale. So remember, D is the name of the scale and it has 2 sharps. G is the name of the scale and it has 1 sharp. C is the name of the scale and it has no sharps and no flats. So let's move on. We're going to look at a little bit of bass clef. And please remember that whether you're looking at bass clef or treble clef, the scale is still the same. So if you're starting on C in the bass clef, it still follows the same pattern. There are no sharps and no flats. If you're starting on D in the bass clef, it still only has 2 sharps, okay? So let's take a look at this next one. Now this is bass clef, remember. Can anybody tell me what pitch we're starting on here? Remember, it looks a little different than treble clef. Anybody? No? All right. We're starting on E, okay? So we have our do and our do, that's E, okay? Remember that when we're starting with do, the pitch that is do is the name of the scale, okay? So we'll also notice that E major has 4 sharps, okay? They are F sharp, G sharp, C sharp, and D sharp, okay? So tell me, how many sharps does E major have?
4.
4, good. Please raise your hand. All right, so let me give you a quiz, okay? How many sharps does G major have? Yes?
1.
Good. And what is it?
F.
F. Good. All right. And let's see. How many sharps does D major have? 2. All right. Do we need to review that at all?
I'm just putting in my notes.
Okay, good. All right, and the 2 sharps that D major has is F sharp and C sharp. Please be writing this down, okay? Now let's revisit E sharp, okay? Or excuse me, E major. And it has 4 sharps, okay? F sharp, G sharp, C sharp, and D sharp, okay? Sound good? Let's move on. Now, this, we're starting on B. So do and do are B. So this is our B major scale. And you'll notice that as we move up to each sharp scale, we're adding a sharp. So that means that B major, after moving from E major, will have 5 sharps in the scale, okay? Still keeping with that whole tone and half tone feeling, okay? So, we have A sharp, excuse me, C, sorry, I was thinking of treble clef. We have C sharp, excuse me, D sharp, F sharp, G sharp, and A sharp, okay? And that is their order. in the scale. Okay? Sorry about that. So let's review. We have B major. We sharp, what is this note?
C.
Yes. And then
D.
mm-hmm.
F.
F sharp, yes. G sharp.
G sharp.
And A sharp. Okay, so these are the sharps that make up the B major scale. All right? And now we'll move on to this one. And this one might seem a little tricky because we're starting with a pitch that already is sharped. But it's no different. We still keep that whole tone and half tone formula when we're moving to the F sharp major scale. And some of you are probably thinking, F sharp major, that sounds a little weird, but it is in fact a scale. So, how many sharps should this scale have if we're moving in a sequence? The last scale had 5 sharps, so this scale should have
6.
6, right. So, we have F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, C sharp, D sharp, E sharp, and then F sharp is our do. Sorry about that. The phone rings sometimes. All right. So we're moving in this sequence, and we add a sharp to each scale. Okay? Now let's move on. Going back into treble clef. Whoa, that has a lot of sharps, doesn't it? Not really. Just like F sharp, our C sharp major scale will also have a sharp on the beginning pitch, or our do. And we will add another sharp to it, so this scale has all of the sharps. There are only 7 sharps, right? So we have C sharp, D sharp, E sharp, F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, B sharp, and C sharp. That sounds like a lot of sharps, doesn't it? I bet. But, you know, we still keep with that whole tone, half tone, whole tone, whole tone, whole tone, half tone formula, okay? So we have to add those sharps in there to keep that pattern. All right. So,
Miss Bachtel,
yes.
in every major scale, is it whole tone? How is that again?
Whole tone, half tone, whole tone, whole tone, half tone.
And that's in every major scale?
In every major scale. That's correct.
Thank you.
All right. So as I mentioned before, we just went through all of the keys that have sharps in them. Now we'll be moving on to flat keys, okay? Just as a review, how many sharps does D major have? 2 sharps. That's great. Good job. All right, so let's look at our next scale. We see that we have 1 flat, right? So, what pitch are we starting on here?
F.
F. Good. So, this is our F major scale. And we see that there are no sharps in this scale, right? Because you can't have sharps or flats in the same scale. You can either have one or the other. So, keeping with our whole, half formula, we go from F to G to A. We flat or lower the pitch of B, okay? We flatten, I should say, the pitch of B, and then we go C, D, E, F, okay? So let's go back to our solfege and sing this. Okay, gentlemen here, ladies. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, remember, that's that B flat, okay? All right, let's look at our next one. Okay, we'll notice that we start with a flat key, okay? Or, excuse me, with a flat do. And our pitch that we'll be starting on is B. So this is our B flat major scale, okay? And we'll notice that we have two flats in this scale. All right, so that's B flat and E flat, okay? So in our F major scale, we have one flat, and that is B. In our B flat major scale, we have two flats, right? We build upon these scales with flats like we do in sharps. So we have one key with one sharp and one key with one flat, okay? And they increase simultaneously. So let's move on. Let's go back, to bass clef, okay? All right, so looking at our next pitch, don't let this trip you up because we were just looking at treble clef, okay? What note are we starting on?
E flat.
E flat, good. All right, so in our E flat major scale, we'll notice that we added three flats, right? So we have E flat, A flat, and B flat, right? All right, so in our next scale, we'll continue adding flats, okay? So our next scale is A flat, okay? Making sense so far?
And there should be 4 flats in this?
Yes, exactly. We keep adding to our flats or sharps in each scale, okay? So we'll have an A flat, B flat, D flat, and E flat in the A flat major scale, okay? Does that make sense? All right, moving on, we'll look here. Okay, what scale would this be?
D flat?
D flat major, yes. And we add how many flats to this scale?
5?
5, good. So, let's name them together. We have D flat,
D flat, C flat.
E flat. We're thinking of treble clef. It's kind of strange to go back and forth, I know, but it'll help us build each way, okay? So let's start again. Ready? D flat,
D flat,
E flat, then this would be G flat, A flat, B flat, and then ending on that D flat for our octave does, okay? Good. So, moving right along. On this page, we have a treble clef and a bass clef back to back, okay? So we're going to end in our flat keys before we start talking about key signatures, okay? So, in our treble clef, we see that we have another major scale, but it's starting with a flat. Can anybody tell me what pitch we're starting on in this key?
G flat?
G flat, good job. And how many flats should be in this key if we keep adding flats to each of our keys?
5.
5, good. So we have G flat, A flat, good.
B
flat,
flat, D flat, E flat,
and
G
end
flat.
on, yes, end on G flat. Good. So, some of you are probably thinking, well, I know that when I play or when I sing, G flat is the same as F sharp. Right. So, in our previous examples, we showed F sharp major. What we call this is enharmonic. Enharmonic scales have the same pitch, I should say the same sounding pitch, but they look different on the scale. So let's think of it this way. If you go to your instrument or you're singing and you see a key, a pitch on your staff, we'll have F sharp, and that's the same as G flat, okay? There are 3 enharmonic scales, okay? So we have F sharp and G flat, which we just said, and then we should have B major and C flat, okay? Those will sound the same because B is the same sounding pitch as C flat, okay? The only thing that's different about these scales is how many sharps or flats are in them. So if you remember that B major is the one that has the sharps, C flat, as the name suggests, will have the flats in the key, okay? Our next enharmonic scale is C sharp and D flat. This is the one that we're going to, oh, I'm sorry, we already did talk about that one. But they will sound the same as well. So C sharp and D flat are the same pitch, okay? So those enharmonic scales will sound the same, but have a different name depending on the sharp or the flat. Okay? Does that make sense to everybody? I'm seeing nods, so that looks like a good sign. Okay, so let's finish up with our scales here. We were just talking about G flat, which also sounds the same as
F sharp?
F sharp. Good. Now, we will end with C flat major. This is the one that has as many sharps, or excuse me, as many flats as C sharp major, but it sounds the same as D sharp major. Okay? Or excuse me, I'm sorry. Sounds the same as B major. Okay? So we have C sharp, D sharp, E sharp. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm saying sharps. You know, it gives the sign of a good teacher when they can admit their own mistakes. Here we go again. All right? C flat, D flat, E flat, F flat.
F.
Yes, F flat.
Thank you.
G flat, A flat, B flat, and then we end on our do, which is C flat. That's that octave. Okay? Does that make sense to everyone, even though I made that little slip up with the sharps and flats?
It's hard. Can I ask a question, Ms. Bachtel?
Yes.
Why would a composer use C flat instead of just making it a B major?
Sometimes we do that so that, or I should say, sometimes composers do that because they will be in a flat key, or they will be using chromaticism. And we haven't gotten to chromaticism yet, but we'll touch on that probably sometime by the end of the week. It makes it a little bit easier for writing. It looks very strange, but that's how they do that. Does that make sense to you?
Thank you.
All right. So we've gone through all of our major scales using sharps and flats. And remember that C major is the only key that doesn't have either flats or sharps. Okay? Does that make sense to everybody? So, how do we arrive at finding these keys quickly? Well, there's such a handy-dandy thing as a key signature, and that's what we're going to take a look at next. So you'll see a number of these. If you've ever looked in your music, sharps and flats usually come after the time signature, correct? So, to determine the key, we have to see, well, how many sharps or flats are in this key, okay, in this major key. All right, so we know that C major has no sharps or flats, so the key signature will be left blank, okay? Now there is a specific order that we use in the numbers of sharps and flats that we add, okay? We start with F sharp, okay? So here we will add our F sharp, and this key would be
F sharp major?
Not exactly. Remember that we start with G major, okay? And that's the key that only has one sharp. An easy way to think of that is to look at where this sharp lies and think of it as T. So we can think T do from the line, and our do will be G. Does that make sense? I'm getting nods? Okay. So, next key is what major key? We have our F sharp and we added a C sharp. So if we look and we think T do from that sharp, what should our major key be?
D?
D, correct. So we'll add our do on the D line, okay? Next, we keep our F sharp and we keep our C sharp and we add a G sharp. So thinking in that pattern of T do with a G sharp as T, what should our key be?
A?
A major. Good. I see that you're kind of understanding this. Some of you are giving me some I'm not quite sure about that. Do you have any questions at all? Or should I move on? No questions? Okay. That must mean you're just focusing really hard. Okay. So we've moved to bass clef, and remember that it's the same as it is in treble clef, okay? Scales will always start the same, okay? So we have F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, and D sharp. So if we think T do from D sharp, what should our major key be?
E?
E. Good. So this is our E sharp major key signature. Okay? Now, moving on, we keep our F sharp, our C sharp, G sharp, and D sharp, but we add an A sharp. Okay? So thinking T do, what should our key be?
B?
B. And I kind of gave that answer away. But good job. So our do is B, and this is the key signature that we use. Okay? Next, we have our F sharp, excuse me, C sharp, G sharp, D sharp, A sharp, and we add, oh gosh, I screwed that up, didn't I? Sometimes we get confused. All right, so we add an E sharp to this major key, okay? So thinking of T do what should our key be?
F? F major?
Close. Remember that we already have an F sharp in the key signature. So thinking that way, what should our key be? It is F, but in this case it would be F sharp major, okay? So this is our key signature, minus that little mistake there, for F sharp major, okay? Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, let's move on. Now we see in this treble clef key signature the entire pattern for sharps, okay? This has all of the sharps in it. So we have F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, D sharp, A sharp, E sharp, and B sharp, okay? So this is the pattern that we use. You'll notice it kind of looks a little bit like a tic-tac-toe board gone wrong, but we have 2 corresponding sharps, 3 corresponding sharps, and then another 2 corresponding sharps. Does that make sense to everybody? Yes? Okay. So, thinking of this final sharp as T on the B sharp line, what will our key be?
C?
C, but remember, we already have a C sharp in the key signature. So what does that make that C? Sharp. So our key would be C sharp major. Okay? Sound good? Now, moving on to flat keys. There's another formula to think of when we think of finding the key for flats, okay? We can think of the last flat as fa and count down to do from there, okay? So if we're looking at this key signature, it has a B flat in it, okay? So if we think of the last flat, or the only flat in this case, as fa, what should our key be? Counting down, fa, mi, re, do. That lands us on our F space, correct? So our key will be F major. Now, another handy trick for finding this, when we're looking at this key signature, we see that the last flat, okay, is E flat, and that is fa. Now, counting down, we notice, this is our do line, and look at that, it's B, but the B is flattened. So our key is B flat. So another way to think of this pattern is not necessarily thinking of this as fa, but as this is do. So the second to last flat is your key. Does that make sense? Yes? Okay. So looking at our next set of key signatures, this is bass clef again, but looking at this, we keep our B flat and our E flat, and we add an A flat, okay? So thinking of it in the pattern that I just described to you, what do you think our key will be? Oh, oops. I'm seeing some scratching of heads. So we're going to think of this again. All right. So our second to last flat should be our key, correct? So this flat is on the E line. So it's E flat major, okay? Same thing with this one. We keep our B flat, our E flat, and our A flat, and add another flat, which is D flat. So thinking of that pattern, What should our next key signature be for?
A flat.
A flat. Good. Next, what do you think it should be? We keep our B flat, our E flat, our A flat, and our D flat, and add a G flat.
Is it D flat?
Yes, it is. Excellent job. All right. And so this key, we keep our B flat, our E flat, A flat, D flat, G flat, and we add a C flat. And remember that C flat is the same as B, right? They sound the same, okay? So thinking of it in that pattern, what should the name of our key be? G flat, because our second to last flat is G. And then this is our final key, because this one we know is C major, okay? So our last flatted key shows all of the flats in sequence. So we have B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat, G flat, C flat, and F flat, okay? In relationship, we see that this has as many flats as this key does sharps. So if we think of it that way, what should the name of this key be?
Is it C?
Close. C flat, remember, because we have that flatted C, okay? All right, so we have determined what all of our major scales are with sharps and flats, or in C major's case, no sharps or flats, and we've determined how to arrive at finding do from our key signatures. Are there any questions before we end the lecture? Seeing no hands. Okay. I hope this gives you a little bit better idea of major scales and key signatures. If you have any questions, please see me after class. Thank you very much.